We've made as a country a lot of progress since 1963, but it's obvious that racism still is a big issue, and it is something that we need to work on eliminating these tribalist ideas that people have that certain races are better than other races.
Hey, everybody, to the Base Politics Podcast. I'm Jack Hunter. You're not used to hearing my voice on this podcast. I'm here with Kiyah Willis, and we are filling in for Brad Polumbo, who's going to be on Gutfeld tonight, which is something you will learn the next day after he's already been on Gutfeld. Hannah Cox is also out of town doing various work in base politics business. But Kiyah, it's great to be with you. We've been working together for a little while, but glad to talk face to face and have this conversation today.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you face to face as well. I'm really excited. This is my first time hosting something like this, so hopefully this goes well. I'm really excited to jump into our topics today.
I think it's going to be fantastic. I just learned to read yesterday, which has helped immensely with my writing skills. So let's get into this. Today, we're going to be going over a number of topics. We're having a little bit of fun here, but something very serious that happened recently, the tragic shooting in Jacksonville of an apparent white supremacist who took his own life at the scene after killing 3 people of color. He was trying to find black people to kill. An awful, awful situation. We'll get into that first. It is also on a more, not lighthearted is not the way to put it, but a more positive note. It is the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington and Martin Luther King's famous speech and what that means for America and Americans. We're going to talk about that a little bit. President Biden is requesting, with the uptick in COVID cases being slightly higher than it has been in recent times, as reported by hospitals and whatnot, Biden is requesting more funding for vaccines. Rand Paul had something to say about that. We're going to discuss that a little bit today. And in conjunction with that, we're seeing mask mandates being brought back in various places. And what is that going to look like after we went through the pandemic? We'll talk about that and more, but let's jump into it. Well, our first subject today is not a fun one. There's a tragedy that happened recently. There was a shooting in Jacksonville, and the information we know, and we don't use the assailant, the shooter's names on Based. We don't want to elevate that in any way, and I think that is at least a factor in why these people, whatever ideology they're coming from or mental issue, do latch on to. They want some sort of fame in however heinous ways they can achieve that. But there was a shooting in Jacksonville. It was an apparent white supremacist. Guy had swastikas on his rifle. I mean, there's no, you don't have to examine this very far to figure out a manifesto left over. He took his own life with racist writings and whatnot. And he was looking for black people to shoot at a Dollar General in Jacksonville. There are so many ramifications and angles to take on this. Ron DeSantis showed up at an event that was honoring the shooting victims, and the community was not very happy about Ron DeSantis's presence. And we can talk about that and other things, but that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is that some human beings who lost their lives because of some mental jackass with whatever his problems were, mental depression, I don't care. That wasn't their cross to bear. They lost their lives because of this person who had his own problems. Kiyah, I want to hear from you first on this before I elaborate any further.
Such a tragic incident. It's always a tragedy when people lose their lives, and I think especially because this was, as we'll talk about later, the same day that they were celebrating the Martin Luther King March on Washington.
Same day. Yeah.
It was the same day, yes, Saturday, when this man decided to plan this attack and go out and target black people. It's just all around a very, very terrible thing. This man had a lot of issues, a terrible racist ideology, as well as just a complete disregard for human life. I don't know. We've made as a country a lot of progress since 1963, but it's obvious that, racism still is a big issue, and it is something that we need to work on eliminating these tribalist ideas that people have that certain races are better than other races. I think that one thing in the reporting of this story that has been frustrating for me, given that, is how people have, or some people I've seen on social media and some people that I have seen on the news have been taking this man who has this terrible tribalist idea of race and believes that black people are inferior, And they're turning around and saying that this is the reason that he did this is because of his race, and are saying that it's because he is white, or because he is a man, or because he is a gun owner, or kind of putting him into these groups and trying to demonize these entire groups because of this man's actions. And when really, like, the reason this happened was because of tribalism in the first place. I think it's so important that we realize this man was an individual, an evil individual who had like a lot of really, really terrible ideas, and that we don't take the responsibility off of him by trying to blame people around him and trying to blame these other groups that had nothing to do with him and his issues and his own thoughts that he is responsible for himself. But I guess those are kind of my thoughts on it. Just the solution to all of this is individualism and treating people as individuals. If, he had more of an individualist ideology, this wouldn't have happened, and we need to push that as the solution to this problem.
I completely agree with everything you said. Look, we are very libertarian leaning here at Base Politics. Of course, we believe in the individual, and the responsibility or irresponsibility lies with the individual. Kiyah, our friend Brad Polumbo wrote a piece at the Washington Examiner recently about, these tragic situations. People with a political agendas try to blame entire groups for the actions of one individual. The fault of this shooting is the man who did it. I used to work for Senator Rand Paul, and he had baseball practice. They do the congressional baseball game every year where Democrats play against Republicans. And at the Republican practice field in Alexandria, Virginia, a Bernie Sanders supporter showed up a few years ago and started firing rounds from his rifle. Rand hid behind a tree. Steve Scalise was hit. He was okay. And I don't blame Bernie Sanders for that. I don't blame Bernie Sanders supporters for that. That was a crazy maniac. There are people who are genuinely racist and think bad things about people who don't look like them that don't go shoot people over it. I mean, we could do this all day long. You could be a Scientologist and want to shoot non-Scientologists. Not that any Scientologist has ever done that, but I'm just saying, you brought it up, Kiyah, tribalism, and just, I saw George Takei, who's, famously very left-leaning, and he's like, blood is on your hands if you're a right-winger because of what happened in Jacksonville. Stupid stuff like that. Worse than just saying that and putting that blame on people who had nothing to do with committing violence, it's excusing the shooter. That person did that. If I'm a member of one of those families of one of the slain victims, that's who I'm mad at. Now, it's not wrong to speculate and think about things beyond that. How did this person end up this way? What made him like this? But, the idea that in a country, a liberal democracy with free speech, where we have free expression and we exchange ideas and share news and information, that those discussions should not be had from our own perspective because it might lead to something like this is not a country I want to live in. And the problem is people like this. How did they get this? Should there be more mental health care? Should there be more awareness? I remember the Pulse nightclub shooting. I think that was in Orlando. It was a primarily gay club. The authorities had all sorts of information on the eventual shooter that was never followed up on. How many times does that happen where people say, hey, I know Fred's acting weird and he's doing this and he bought this and he said this and you're the authorities and here's this information, and it's just never analyzed or caught up on in the right way. And then the tragedy happens and everybody says things like that, moving backwards. And we'll add to this, Kai. I'm sorry, I don't mean to dominate the conversation here. I have too many thoughts in my head and run my mouth too much. People also want to push for more gun control in these situations. These guns were legally bought, as far as I understand, so I guess you could make that argument. Lots of these situations, the guns are not legally bought. Lots of these situations never become situations because other people with legal guns stop the situation. That never makes national headlines. There's a Waffle House I live in Charleston, South Carolina half the time. I live in Washington, D.C. half the time. And in Charleston, there's a Waffle House near where I live. I like to go sit in there and write about these things I'm running my mouth about right now and eat some hash browns and eggs and bacon, and it's nice. I even know the people that work there at this point. Not long ago, a man came in with a sawed-off shotgun and tried to rob the Waffle House. Well, that did not happen because another man with a carry concealed took care of that. And he was thanked by the police officers and the employees for potentially saving lives. That was not a national headline. That was a local headline. So we're talking about the Jacksonville shooting, and I'm throwing a lot of issues around into one thing, but people make all sorts of many arguments about the situation, many of which ignore the primary and exclusive culpability of the man, the evil, terrible man who shot these people for no other reason than they didn't look like him and he didn't like the color of their skin. We're going to continue to hear about this. We're going to continue to hear from left-leaning celebrities about blood is on the hands of Ron DeSantis and all this. He did not get a good reception when he showed up at that I think it was a tribute, and maybe even at the Dollar General. I could be wrong about that. For the victims, those who were slain, and he got booed. I don't know if you had any thoughts about that, Kiyah, or what happened with all that.
Yeah, I think you are correct. It was a tribute to the victims, and all of the families were there. And yeah, they were blaming Ron DeSantis and booing him. I believe I heard two different reasons, and it could be a combination of both.
Okay.
One was that they were blaming him for the fact that he bought the guns legally, and they were saying Ron DeSantis hadn't done enough to stop gun violence in Florida. And then the other was that they were blaming him for his anti-woke policies, and saying that it was because of his beliefs against wokeness that this man got the idea to go and commit this crime in the first place. I think this goes back to what we were saying before about the Bernie Sanders supporter. Like, Ron DeSantis is not to blame for this man's action. I don't even know if this person supported Ron DeSantis, right. Or knew or supported anything that he did or said, or knows anything about his policies. And Ron DeSantis is not to blame for this man's actions. And yeah, to blame Ron DeSantis for this is to take the responsibility off of the shooter.
You mentioned the woke policies, and I don't want to get too far away from. We can't discount when you take human lives for something as stupid as this, you never want to degrade or undervalue that. But I would say, you mentioned DeSantis's woke policies, and I disagree with many things DeSantis does. I like some things that DeSantis does. This whole concept of woke, and I was going to get into this a little bit when we talk about the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington. What that means is different to different people. I have a very firm definition of what woke is, and it's not necessarily it's not what DeSantis is doing, and I don't necessarily agree with the policy. But people, I don't care if you're black, white, brown, yellow. A lot of people call what's woke what they used to call social justice. So, I worked for Ron Paul, and he would point out frequently that there were more black and brown people in prison than white people for marijuana offenses. To me, that's not woke. That is stating a fact that the criminal justice system persecutes. They'll go to a bad part of town and round up people instead of going to the college dorms and rounding up people for pot, if you see what I'm saying. And disproportionately, that ends up being different people. That is not wokeness. That is right and wrong. That shouldn't be happening. You should be equal under the law. To me, woke is, Kiyah, I have an opinion about something, and you might have one, but I'm right and you're wrong. You have no right to your opinion. It's the cancellation. You can't think a certain way. You have to think the way I do, or you're gone. To me, that's key to wokeness, and a lot of people miss that. So maybe that crowd there, and they're all hurting. These people died. These are people they might have known, part of their community, family members even. If they're mad at DeSantis about that in that context, that's a different kind of tribalism that doesn't really make sense when you break it down. To me, that's my opinion. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think I have a slightly different definition of woke, but I do agree that is a different type of tribalism. And
I'd love to hear your definition, because apparently I'm the only one that has this one half the time.
Yeah, I do think that there is a difference between recognizing when there is injustice and assuming that there is injustice whenever something doesn't go your way.
Okay.
And what I find with wokeness is that it is always assuming that when something, or maybe not when something doesn't go your way, but when something bad happens or something that you don't like happens, it is because of injustice or some sort of bigotry out, and not because of some other factors that you're not taking into consideration.
Okay.
And so I think in this situation, obviously this person was a racist, and we have proof. He left this manifesto. He had swastikas drawn on these guns, right? There's something we can prove that this person did this because of race-related issues. But sometimes people go crazy and they do things, and it has nothing to do with the race of the person or the sex of the person that they victimize. It's just they targeted a person who happened to be this demographic. And so people will jump to, oh, it was because of this motivation.
Right.
And it's not, it's just a random happenstance. So I think that wokeness, the way that I've always defined it is this oversensitivity to trying to find injustice, even in situations where it might not be there. So
I think that's a good definition. There's an illiberalism to it, and you're touching on that as well. That's the key thing to me. We think of,
yes.
oh, these liberals are woke. I'm like, no, they're not liberals. That's part of why they're woke. That's part of it. Well, let's move on to something a little more positive. It was positive in the moment that it happened, in the face of things that weren't positive, and that's the reason it happened, which is the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington during the height of the Civil Rights era, and Martin Luther King's famous speech. Anybody that's ever gone to the Lincoln Memorial, they got the little block there where you can stand exactly where Martin Luther King Jr. stood. And Kiyah, you take it away. I shouldn't be the person talking about this first, but I do have some things to say about it. But you first.
So, 1963, August 28th, 1963, we had the March on Washington. I believe it was, I have the numbers here. 250,000 people approximately were at
this isn't Trump elections, his inaugural numbers. This is real numbers.
Yeah, this is real numbers.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, so a lot of people met at the Lincoln Memorial and were protesting segregation and the injustices that were happening in the 60s, right? Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech that one day, his children will be judged not by the color of their skin, but the content of their character, which led to the Civil Rights Act being passed in 1964. So Monday was the actual day, the actual anniversary of this speech and this march. But Saturday, the 26th, was when they kind of did the celebration, because Monday was a work day. People went to the same place where the speech was given and gave some speeches on issues that they thought were kind of still happening today, and talked about the progress that we've made and still the work that we have to do. And yeah, I think this was awesome. It's great to all come together and celebrate these really important and positive moments in our history. And yeah, I wasn't there because I live in Texas and it was kind of far to go to DC, but I'm really happy for everyone who was able to go there. I saw a few social media posts of like some older people who were at the speech in 1963 and then were able to be there for this celebration. So that was really cool to see that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you mentioned some of the veterans, for lack of a better term, that were there, people who lived at or were there. As we get further away in time, MLK Jr. is obviously an iconic figure in history, but if you go back to that time, he was extremely controversial. I mean, J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI were keeping tabs on this guy. Was it Hoover or somebody in the FBI called it, they feared the rise of a black messianic Christ-like figure or something like that. Basically calling him a domestic terrorist. Malcolm X might have been higher up on that list, but MLK Jr. was slightly more popular broadly. But point being, these were civil rights figures. Black Panthers were certainly in there. These were people that they were keeping tabs on. I'm talking about the federal government, as, like you might have kept tabs on a mosque after 9/11, which I don't agree with either. I'm just putting this in the context. They were considered dangerous. They were considered terrorists on some level. And we look back and we see, you could tell my accent. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. I'm kidding. Obviously, I'm Southern. But I've had conversations for years with certainly conservative Southern friends of mine about that time. And, I've thought about that in different ways. And Civil Rights Act, 1965, everything that happened. If you were a black person in the Southeast, and this happened other places, but certainly the Southeast at that time, and you were, I don't know, vacationing with your family, and you went from one interstate exit to the next, and you couldn't go to the bathroom or go to a certain restaurant. There's that movie, was it The Green Book, which I thought was a good movie. That book was showing black people where they could do stuff, and it was limited. Could you imagine living in a world, I don't care what anybody listening or watching this, color, background, anything, where you're that limited in your ability to just exist? That's what Martin Luther King was fighting against. A lot of white Americans didn't see it. His method of peaceful nonviolence and what happened in Selma and all those demonstrations where the entire country, everybody of every color, but especially the white audience, saw these peaceful protesters, black and some white, being just manhandled and mauled by dogs, everything that happened. Martin Luther King Jr. was correct, and that's what brought such great attention to the civil rights movement, helped change eventually or make laws against that situation I just described about being a black family and trying just to exist and drive around and have a vacation or be normal. The March on Washington was the culmination of that fight. Of course, it continued after, and obviously the horrible assassination of MLK later. But you cannot downplay in any way, shape, or form the importance of the March on Washington, everything they'd fought for from the 50s up to that moment, 1963. What a major moment in American history. I think it was not this year, but the year before, we finally recognized Juneteenth as a national federal holiday, which I think was a wonderful thing. And the reason it's a wonderful thing is not only does it commemorate, and I think this relates to the March on Washington. If you disagree, Kiyah, maybe say so, but I think it does. It was recognition, obviously, of former slaves who didn't know it yet in Texas. It was actually Ron Paul's district in Galveston, Texas, were informed that the Emancipation Proclamation had happened and slavery was over, but they were the last people to learn about this. The reason I thought it was important for it to be recognized, officially, is that's part of the American experience. The March on Washington and everything happened was part of the American experience. If you're a patriotic American of any background or any race, creed, or color, we're all supposed to share this American experience, the good, bad, and the ugly, and recognize the bad and the ugly and try to make it better. That's the whole idea. That was Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, is that the American dream that was afforded, that's supposed to be afforded, as promised in the Declaration in spirit, had not been achieved or given to or afforded by all Americans, particularly Black Americans at that time. But if, and I'm all over the place here a little bit, the reason I love the musical Hamilton so much, some goofy ass conservatives try to say, oh, this is woke or stupid. No, screw you, you're an idiot. The reason Hamilton is so great is they're telling the story of the founding fathers, and Alexander Hamilton's not my favorite. I'm more Jeffersonian, but the hell with that. It was a completely non-white cast doing hip-hop songs about the founding of the United States. That's what I'm talking about. Celebrate the March on Washington and the 60th anniversary. Celebrate Juneteenth. Watch Hamilton. I'm not even a big musical guy, but it is what it is. We're supposed to share in this American experience, all of our backgrounds, black, white, whatever, and that's how we become a better country. And I think this anniversary was well worth celebrating, and I'm glad to see the celebration over the weekend. Or maybe I'm full of crap too, Kiyah. Tell me, I don't know what I'm talking about.
No, just one clarification about just Juneteenth. That Juneteenth was the end of Texas was the last state in the Confederacy to end slavery. Was not the last state in the country.
Correct. Yeah. That's what I meant. Sorry.
We need another holiday, I think, for the last state in the country. So I'm like, yeah, this is great, but we need another one for the ending of it in the other states as well.
Sure. Correct. I stand corrected. But that is Ron Paul's district. He was you can look at statements of him going back to like 2008 or 9 or 10, and when most white Americans, including me, never heard of Juneteenth, but many Black Americans had. But he was commemorating it because that was he would say, like, what's more libertarian or a celebration of liberty than ending freaking human bondage, the worst thing you could possibly imagine. So yeah, but you're correct. Thank you for correcting me. So, any other thoughts on the march and the 60th anniversary? I do think people forget how controversial a figure MLK was back then compared to how we view him now. Even the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday was controversial in the 80s when that finally happened, which is crazy to think about now. But just, Malcolm X was I like Malcolm X. Anybody watching this, The Godfather of Harlem, that's on Hulu, is freaking awesome. It's about Bumpy Johnson, who was like the gangster played by Forrest Whitaker, and his friendship with Malcolm X. I didn't know about all that, but back to my point as I wander, Malcolm X was seen as the more radical, more dangerous. He did not preach nonviolence, and MLK was, if you were certainly a white observer, the one you were more comfortable with among civil rights leaders. But by the U.S. government and by many people that day, he was considered pretty radical and controversial and even a danger, which is crazy to think of in 2023.
Yeah, I think they both had there are pros and cons. There are definitely a lot of policies that MLK supported that I am not a supporter of as a small government supporter. But I think that definitely, his preaching individualism and, I said, colorblindness and treating people based on their character which is his legacy, is just awesome. And it's sad that there are so many people who don't agree with that today, where I feel like that is the most important and the best thing that he has stated. I hope that more people latch on to that message of his. And yeah, I'm glad that this has become such a big national news coverage of his speech that did cover that exact topic of individualism.
For sure. And I think that gets missed out. We're libertarian leaning, based as a libertarian leaning news outlet, and use an opinion. People talk about the Civil Rights Act. Barry Goldwater voted against it. He didn't have a racist bone in his body, but that's just you can't do this to small businesses, their business. I've changed my mind on the Civil Rights Act over the years. I expressed that earlier. And I'll say this, that any libertarians watching this thing called base, like, oh, you support the Civil Rights Act. I meant everything I just said about the situation that minorities were living in the South, and that I am a libertarian because I believe the libertarian solution is the best solution in most situations. I am not an ideological purist. I think we're humans, we're fallible, the Christian view that nobody's perfect, however you want to look at that, wherever you're coming from. I think that was a situation where the Civil Rights Act was the right thing to do. People get mad about that, but especially coming from the region I'm from and the experience I've had and observing other things and not having the experience of some of my neighbors that I hear about or learn about or try to absorb, I think it was the right thing to do. And if anybody's mad at that, they can come at us. I don't care.
Hey guys, Hannah here. Big things are happening at Base Politics, and we want to make sure you stay in the loop with all of our productions and developments. If you like the Base Politics podcast, you can find it every Wednesday morning on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Brad's YouTube. You want to support the show? Be sure to join the Base Politics Locals channel, where you can help produce it for only $5 a month. You can also catch our new shows, Propaganda and Damage Control, every Saturday on our respective YouTubes and Facebook channels. On Damage Control, Brad teams up with right-of-center LGBT guests to restore sanity to the increasingly unhinged debate over these issues. And on Propaganda, I'm taking video footage of police behaving badly every week and using those videos to expose problems within U.S. policing and the laws that guide it. Remember, Base Politics is a nonprofit organization dedicated to moving the culture through content. If you want to be a part of these efforts, you can donate to fund our work at base-politics.com.
Kiyah, I think we should move on to the next thing, which also involves dampening individualism. I believe we have a clip of Joe Biden talking about what we might be doing with vaccines in the future. COVID-19 is on the rise. It's not a big deal. You don't have people dying in droves or anything, but it is up. And of course, the powers that be want to bring back vaccines and maybe mandates even. I think we have a clip we want to roll here. This is Joe Biden over the weekend vacationing in Tahoe. He was asked about the subject.
Mr. President, can you say anything about the uptick of COVID cases and the new variant?
Yes, I can. Matter of fact, I signed off this morning on a proposal we have to present to the Congress a request for additional funding for a new vaccine that is necessary, that works. And tentatively, not decided finally yet, tentatively it is recommended that, or would likely be recommended that everybody get it, no matter whether they got it before or not.
Joe Biden obviously answered that question, that he's requesting new funding for a vaccine that works. What the hell does that mean? Does that mean that the one that they mandated earlier doesn't work? And, but let's forget the question of, if we're going to get the mandated vaccines again or not. That is quite a hell of a thing to say. Rand Paul had a response to that. I'm just reading his Twitter right now. He says, so to recap, and he's commenting obviously on the audio we just heard, President of the United States is saying the vaccine they're currently promoting and they mandated, in caps, does not work. And he has a second comment. He wants more funding for another one. And Rand Paul rounds out his tweet with, that's a no, a capital N-O from me. And I think I agree with that sentiment. Kiyah, I mean, that works. That's the one that got me on top of just what he's trying to do.
Yeah, I'm wondering what he means by works. I know there were clips in 2020 and 2021 where Biden believed that the COVID vaccine would prevent all transmission of the virus, and he said this multiple times. Even CNN had to correct him and say, no, the virus or the vaccine may decrease transmission, but it does not completely eliminate it. So I wonder if for him, works means this miracle drug that will completely erase the virus from ever being able to enter your system, which that would be impossible. And I'm hoping he's not wasting our taxpayer dollars on trying to create an impossible vaccine. But with the government these days, I never know what they're doing.
You never know.
I think that, yeah, you absolutely never know. For me, I think that this is just, it's another sign that the government should not be involved in manufacturing these vaccines, apart from just, regulating companies to not be able to actively harm you with them. But like, the government is using our taxpayer dollars. We cannot control what they're using them for and how they're going about this process. And we can't hold them accountable for it, versus with a private company where you can stop purchasing their product if it's not working or it's, they're not doing the things that they're supposed to be doing. So I'm very frustrated with the fact that my taxes are getting put towards a vaccine that the president is saying doesn't work or doesn't live up to the standards that he wants it to. Because I know that most people now, given what happened in 2020, there are a lot of people who probably will not be getting the vaccine. So they're using the money to make these vaccines people aren't even going to take. That just makes me sad and disappointed and frustrated with what our government's doing.
Sure. And, the people who are most at risk, we know this in retrospect better than ever. And look, let's be charitable to this president for a second. Maybe that's not what he meant, but that's sure as hell what it sounded like, that somehow the ones that we were forced to take didn't work. That's what it sounds like, at least. Maybe that's not what he meant, but whatever. But when we went through this pandemic, and I agree with what you just said, Kiyah, about, private businesses versus the government doing this and having no control over things that are being funded with our tax dollars against our will or without any, we're not voting on this. Throughout the pandemic, we were told things time and again that just turned out not to be true. We were told if you wear a mask, that would help. We now pretty much know cloth masks don't work. We were told that the N95 masks work, but now we're learning that there's like some weird toxic chemical that they're worse for you than if you wore nothing at all, something like that. We were told if you were vaccinated that you couldn't get it again, which of course was completely untrue. We were told if you were vaccinated, you couldn't transmit COVID-19, which we learned not to be true. Everything the authorities said from on the high and guaranteed us was true, from Fauci to the CDC, whether it was Trump parroting it or Biden parroting it or any of these people who just relayed these messages for so-called experts, these messages, they all turned out not to be true. And I don't care where, you have to be a die-hard, progressive, Ukraine flag, syringe on your Twitter, all that kind of stuff to still think all that stuff's true and people should just do it all over again, because they're not. And that's not just a right-leaning thing. That is a human beings on this planet who experienced this pandemic the first time around thing and what that looked like. I recently had a conversation with a friend about all this, and we'll just go ahead and jump into our next subject. Was going to be that they're bringing back mask mandates in different places, different schools and different areas and different orbits, I guess. And I guess some people might be complying, but I honestly think if they tried to do this en masse again, whether it's the mask mandates or the vaccine mandates, I think the first time around, a lot of people complied and a lot of people resisted. There was a mix. But even amongst the resistance, there had to be some people, or even amongst the compliers, there had to be some people, since it was our first go around on this rodeo, maybe some of this stuff works and maybe I don't die or my loved one doesn't die because we take these precautions. I think that had to be in some people's heads. How many people are going to be thinking like that the second time around? I don't think many. I don't care what political background you come from or whatnot. Even the true believers in these precautions, in these CDC advisories or whatever, are deep down going to have doubt. Like, nah, y'all said this and this is not true. This is not going to work. I don't think people comply en masse. And, between what Biden's saying and some people wanting to bringing back mask mandates, I don't see the same public compliance or reaction that we saw the first time around. Maybe you disagree. I don't know.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think it's important to make a distinction too between the mask mandates and the vaccine passports that were placed by the government and ones that are placed by like private businesses. Because right now, what we've seen so far, it is Lionsgate in California, and there is a college in Atlanta that are in placing these mask mandates. And I think private businesses have the right to have whatever policies they want regarding COVID
Of
and
course.
when it comes to their employees. And it is, again, kind of just talking about the differences between government and private. It is then up to us as consumers or the employees of this business to kind of hold them responsible for those things and to criticize them. So I do think that there are going to be a lot of people who are pushing back against this more. And I'm saying this coming from someone, so I have an autoimmune disorder. And when COVID first came around, I complied, at least with masks and things, because
Sure.
I was afraid for my own health and safety. But I always see my health as my kind of responsibility to take care of. I wear masks sometimes even during like flu season because my immune system is not great and I don't want to get sick and end up in the hospital with my condition. I think what these private businesses have to think about is how putting these mandates, these mass mandates that these businesses have, also affects people like me, our ability to take care of our own health.
Right.
In the sense that I remember when the mask mandates first went up, government and private businesses, and how the masks and 95s and things became so expensive because of this artificial increase in demand for them. And so these businesses that had these policies with potentially the right intention of trying to keep me safe were actually making it harder for me to keep myself safe, because with all of the masks being so expensive and constantly being out of stock, I couldn't take care of myself and I couldn't afford to buy the masks that I needed to buy. So I had to buy the cloth masks, which we now know don't work. And I was actually putting myself more at risk because of all of these mandates. Same thing with the vaccine mandates that businesses were having. There was a time when, because of my condition, I wasn't sure if I could get the vaccine, but businesses were having these mandates, so I couldn't go places I needed to go because I didn't have the vaccine, but I couldn't get it. It was a whole mess. I think that private businesses have the right, of course, to have these mandates if they want. And I disagree with people like DeSantis who try to use the government to,
He told businesses what to do.
tell businesses what to do to get involved in their private policies. I think that it is in these businesses' best interests to let people decide what they want to do and how to take care of their own health. And so that's my 2 cents on it. But yeah, in the end, if there's a business that has a mask mandate, like a store or something, I may or may not be shopping there, and they're going to lose my business and me as a consumer, and that's their cross to bear. But yeah, that's my 2 cents on this whole thing.
Sure. And I'll come back to that in a second. I have a friend in Charleston that I've known for many years who has a rare skin disease. It's like 20 people in the world have this disease. And he was freaking out during COVID. He was a bartender. And I mean, public interaction and whatnot, and wore a mask, has very different politics than I do. And so wore a mask for those reasons. But the primary reason was just fear for his own health and his unique health weaknesses, for lack of a better way of putting it. I could never get mad at anybody like that. But, like I said, I live half the time in Old Town Alexandria, Virginia, and you'll see some like middle-aged woman walking around outside with a mask. And like, what the hell are you doing? I think there's more of that than what I just described with my friend's situation, or perhaps yours. I think some private businesses, depending on their mindset, will probably require masks. And I think this time around, a lot more people will be like, no, to hell with you. I'm not going to your store or frequenting you or being a customer of you. And we saw some of that the first go around. But I just think, and I could be wrong, but I think it's going to be a completely different reaction the second go around. I'm repeating myself a bit at this point. But, I don't disagree with anything you said there. And how far the government's going to push this is what I'm curious to see. Being the government, I think they're going to just try to do an absolute repeat of what they did the first time, and people aren't going to have it. And rightfully so. And I'm among them. I'm with you, Kiyah. If there's a business and, I like their product or whatever, and they're requiring masks, I'm probably not going to mess with them or try to do any business with them.
Yeah, I had one more thing to add here, because I have seen some people on social media. Yeah, you were just talking about your friend who
Right.
has a skin condition. I have an autoimmune disorder. I have seen some people on social media who have said, if I see someone wearing a mask, I'm going to be rude to them and I'm going to be mean to them because I think that, I disagree with their politics, or I think that they have some sort of, irrational fear of getting sick, and they're the problem because they want to wear a mask. And I just want to remind our listeners, and hopefully you guys aren't these types of people, but that there are people who actually do need to wear masks, and for our health, it is important that we do. And not everyone is wearing a mask to like virtue signal, that their politics. So if you see someone wearing a mask, please don't be an asshole to them just because they're wearing a mask. There are some people who really do need to wear them.
Well, how about
Yeah.
just respect what they want to do? They're an individual, and you might have an opinion on it, and that's your right as an individual as well. But leave them alone. Leave people alone. Don't take their
Yeah.
stuff. I think I heard that somewhere before. Even if it's their mask on their face. Well, as we wind this down, Kiyah, and I've had a good time, and eager to see Brad and Hannah back here next week, and I can't wait to see Brad on Gutfeld, which when this is finally out will have already happened. They usually do their hot takes, and I certainly have a hot take this week. It's nothing very surprising or unusual, but I am a huge fan as a dude of the Equalizer movies, the 80s TV show that was made into movies by Denzel Washington, and he's whooping ass and all that. Equalizer 3 comes out Friday, and boy, am I there with bells on. Denzel Washington's one of my favorite actors. I've watched, look, there's a lot of guys out there, maybe women too, but certainly a guy thing. I've watched Roadhouse, Godfather 10,000 times, and the Equalizer franchise is in that bucket. And part 3 comes out this weekend, and I'm very excited. So that's my hot take. However, not hot or hot it is. What is your hot take this week, Kiyah?
Well, that's exciting that movie is coming out. I guess I have a movie hot take. It's not maybe as relevant. This is a movie that came out a few years ago, but I was talking to one of my friends this week whose favorite movie is La La Land.
Okay.
And I think that La La Land is overrated. I don't think it deserves
one
to win
best
an
picture,
Oscar.
but I hear you.
And-
Yeah.
Yeah, that is my hot take, is that I am not a fan of La La Land.
Okay. Well, I can see that. I thought it was, like I mentioned with Hamilton earlier, I'm not a big musical person, but if you're going to do something like that, I thought it was about the best version you could do and enjoyed it in that way, but not as cool as the Equalizer. On that note, you'll hear from Brad Polumbo and Hannah Cox next week. But boy, we had a good time filling in for them today. This is the Base Politics Podcast, and we'll see you, or other friends of ours will see you next week. Take care. Good to have fun with you today, Kiyah.
Thank you. It was fun.